All right, we're going to learn a bit more of the Maamar we started this week. See how far we get. Maybe we'll finish it tomorrow. Okay, we're talking, this is the same, oops, wrong share. Right thing here. Okay, we're learning the Maamar, the Rebbe's similar Maamar that we learned on Likutei Torah this week about the Eretz Yisrael is a land of mountains and valleys. So until this point, we spoke about the idea of Eretz Yisrael is the land of mountains and valleys, the land of Eretz Harim. And we wanted to explain what was the idea of Moshe, the Ish Mitzri. So first we explain what's the idea of Mitzrayim. We answer the question, why does it say that Eretz Yisrael is not like Eretz Mitzrayim? What's the idea of Mitzri? Mitzri is a person that in Mitzrayim is always growing. Here, like it says, Taman, here he was born, here he was raised, he was elevated. He had a Aliyah Sa'or. He went up to the high levels of, when we explained the three levels of Mochin, of Ibur, Unika, and Godless HaMochin. So the idea that, and nevertheless we call it Mitzri because it's coming from a Meitzah. You're constantly growing. You're kind of attaching yourself to this Yisr Na'or of Omer Nachoshech, leaving the darkness, going towards the light. But he says, but Eretz Yisrael is not Eretz Mitzrayim. So he said, now he explains what is the idea. Eretz Mitzrayim, Eretz Yisrael is to leave the idea of Mitzrayim. He says, the idea is like this. The Hinei Har, what is Eretz Yisrael? Eretz Yisrael is a land, he said, of the mountain and valleys. And Limtar Hashmaim Tishtamoyim. The question was, why is it Limtar? So this is the same question they asked in Likutei Torah. So he says, the idea is like this. Hinei Haru Makom Gavoya. Har is an elevated space. Ubika, of course, is Eretz Mishar, is a flat land. It's below the flat land, because it's not just it's flat in the mountains, it's usually dip lower than the regular, so to say, leveled ground. As opposed to the mountain that's above the flat land. That's an elevated space. Where is this in the Nimshal? Everything has to have exact. The Hine har sheboiled to be a mishar, when you have a mountain perforating out of what is called the ground, or that's an expression. Like we learned in Likutei Torah, that's a person loving Hashem. You're moving towards Hashem like a mountain going towards Hashem. You're elevating yourself to go from below above with different expressions of desire, like nechsafti, with love and yearning and thirst towards Hashem. To the level of close nefesh, you feel like you can't be contained anymore within your limitations, which is the idea of close nefesh, the soul leaves the body. What's in the valley? The Eretz Misham, when it's lower than, so to say, the flat lands. That's not just that you're flat, but you're going inwards, which is an expression of fear and nullification. To the level of such nullification that one can describe themselves, that we say in the Dabbing, that my soul is like dirt to anyone. No elevation. Until you reach a level of such lowly spirit of the true awe and fear you have of God's greatness. Meaning shahar ubika in close in the avir. The two different types of avodah. The har is the avodah of ava. Yesh mishayiv, I love. Yira is bittul. So now he's going to explain what do they both mean. Close in bein be'evet. In general, like we say, im kavodim, im kavanim, im kavodim. You have a person that has a relationship like a father and a son. Then you have a person that has a relationship like a master and a servant. This is how a person goes about their avoda of sur mira, leaving the bad or staying away from bad, it's just the transgressions, positive commandments. What motivates a person to do what you should do is because you love Hashem, which is the love is the shorish, the root of all the mitzvahs of the positive commandments. Shabbat V'yira, he shorish kol mitzvahs. What prevents a person from transgressing God's will is the fear. Not just the fear of punishment of you have such God is a fear of God's greatness in all of God. So therefore, you're not to transgress anything God forbid in the negative. Harim lashon rabim. So why is it plural? Why is it different types of loves? Should be behara. I love God. Why is it harim plural? Kiesh kama min b'chinsar. There's different stages. He says there's many stages, but in general, there's two groups, which is avas zuta, the smaller love, which is in a love which is built on avas island, built on comprehension of the world. It means you see God's creation and you love that. Self included, you're part of that creation. Rabba, the abundance of love. And because so why does it say also it's a land of valleys, plural? In general, there's two levels of fear. Yira tatav, yira. The lower level of yira, which in it is included all levels of fear of disconnect, fear of missing out, fear of punishment, all in one group. Then for yira is just the great awe of God. And in Kiyadu, as is known, that these four levels, the two levels of love, the two levels of fear, correspond to the four letters of God's name. You do have the four letters of God's name. Shehein dechilu, v'rachimu, v'rachimu v'dechilu. It is fear, starting from backwards up, from bottom up. So the first hay is fear of disconnect or punishment. Then it builds to love, the lower level of love. From there you develop to the greater level of love, to the highest level of yira, which is hey, vav, hey, yud. And if you're going from the other direction, it's yud, which is the higher level, yirila, hey, which is avarabba, great love. Vav, which is Avasutra, the small love, to the Hey Yira, which is the lower level, which is Yira Tata, the lower level of love. Our base Maamar base Pa'omim Dechilu, two levels of love and two levels of fear. That's why it's Harim because mountains, because there's two types of love, which the love is represented by an expression of self, which is a mountain. The valleys is two levels of fear. Base B'chinas Harim, base B'chinas because two levels of fear and two levels of mountain and two levels of valleys. In general. And the Rebbe says there's obviously many stages in between. But Prati says, the Rebbe says to explain this better. Both of them are avoided. Okay, now when we explain the mind with the Kutei Torah, because seemingly what's the Alter Rebbe saying in the Kutei Torah is that the mountains and the valleys are levels within Abbas itself. But here the Rebbe takes the approach of that the valleys are fear and the mountains is love. So he says like this. So Prati says, when you say mountains and valleys, there are two types of a sirusa latata, two types of avoida that a yid does, he or she, shepayelis is sirusa latata that causes a reaction from Hashem, which is an inspiration from above, to respond to our initiation from below. The hesim la'oif the sirusa latata, and the sirusa leila is a response in how are we expressing ourselves in our initiation from below. The Rebbe explains. Yidua is known that it says that the tefillin is like a chaysim, is like a stamp on your heart. The koyal tefillin, that's the reference of tefillin. The whole Torah is represented by the concept of tefillin, which is chaysim al libcha. What does it mean? It's a stamp in your heart. To inyan tefillin shel rosh. That's the tefillin that we put on our heads. Why is it called the heart? Because the straps of the tefillin are supposed to come down to the heart. And the stamp on the forearm, we need tefillin shiyah. That's the tefillin of the arm. What's the difference between the type of stamps? If you have a stamp, let's say on your finger, like in the old days they had finger stamps, and you want to make a stamp into soft wax. So you stamp your finger into the wax, and if the stamp is perforating outwards, it's expressing outwards, it's going outwards. So how does the ink, what kind of shape does it make into the ink, into the wax? It makes an engrave. It goes in. The wax goes in because the stamp pushes into the wax. And when it dries, you have a wax that the shape of this stamp goes into the wax and makes the shape. So, if the chaysim is perforating outwards, so the effect is that the wax goes inwards. What does this mean in our example? We initiate, so we're like the stamp. If we're stamping outwards, so what does God respond? Like the wax, God goes inwards. When we have a yearning, which is the Ava, we're yearning towards Hashem, expressing ourselves, whatever that love is. Ava, which is love, Beis Harim, which is the mountains. That's like a stamp that's sticking outwards. But even this we're moving forward and expressing ourselves in their broadness. So God meets us, but He meets us going inwards to make space for our expression. That's the idea of the vessels, in the light in the vessel. So what does it mean? What does it mean that God goes inwards? In order for the lights to go into the vessels, into the limitations of the world, because we're expressing ourselves. So God has to fit our expression. So then it's a tzimtzum. That's the idea of tzimtzum. That's why the first love is Abba, based on Olam, on the world. But if our initiation, our avoda is going inwards, fear, because being like a valley, that it's the opposite. You could have a stamp that the engraving goes inwards, and when you put it into the wax expresses outwards, goes outwards. Then God expresses Himself. And then it's not God is concealing Himself lights and valleys, then You're letting God reveal Himself as He is. Without any enclothement, without any garments, without any concealment. When Shilas Laves, it says Moshiach comes to that's not going to be any more garments to conceal. And what inspires that when we're like a valley and going inwards. So then God is able to find, we're just making space for God. God, express yourself as much as you want. Please, no limitations. Don't respond and make space for my love, because if you're making space for my love, that's the definition of you're limited. So therefore, God expresses Himself in limitations. And not only that, it's connected to all the limitations, which are limitations of creation. It's much more if God is expressing Himself than if we're expressing ourselves. Because then if we express ourselves, God has to go inwards, which is concealment. It says God is that the sky is like my chair and the earth is like my footstool. Where's God's home? The heavens and earth is the way the stamp goes inwards. When God expresses Himself and He's going outwards, then it's the infinite light, it's the encompassing light. So Inyan Ezeb Ice, that's the idea of God's house, which is the Makiv, which is the external space. How could you inspire God to express Himself and make space for God to express Himself? And we nullify ourselves. Where does God find Himself when a person's an ani and a lowly soul? And then God could express Himself to the poor man in avoida, meaning to say that's not about me loving. It's not yesh mishayim. That where's the greatness of God? The tzov of kalam, maamarim v'kadosh eshkan is the kav shval ruach chedavka, a person who's humble. And that's what we say. The Eretz Yisrael is a land where we're doing avoida, which is Eretz. And it's avoid the Eretz Yisrael, not the avoid the Levi Mitzrayim. So it's still a land that has mountains and valleys. It depends on what kind of person we are and what type of avoid we do. Not that we're saying the avoid of Av is wrong. It's part of God's name. But then it's what the Rebbe is saying over here, there's two parts of what he's saying. It's not just when you express yourself. So God has to just take a seat back and go out and let you just do all the talking. It's like when you have a relationship between a husband and wife. The question is, who's the talkative one? Who's the expressive one? Who makes the decisions? Who's always setting the tone of this couple? And sometimes nothing's bad. That's something. That's the way it works sometimes. But here saying it's not just that. It's the idea is if you're expressive, what are you expressing? You are limited. And you live in a world of limitations, and your love is limited. So when you're expressing yourself, you're bringing to the table limitations. And by bringing to the table limitations and emphasizing the way things are in this world, because you're a creation in this world. So then the only space for God is to respond to that in the limitations of this world. The whole world was created with limitations and symptoms. When you're expressing yourself in a way of going inwards and saying, it's not about me at all. It's all about going inwards. I'm a valley. God, just give the light as is. Don't look at the world as a limitation. Don't look at the space. But the only way for you to express yourself is in a limited manner, because you have to match my emphasis on limitations. I'm going inwards, and therefore I'm making tons of space for broadness of a limitless expression. And therefore he says, Eretz Yisrael is Harim v'Bukayis Shemoira al Seder Avodim Midargo Darga. Boyfriend Mimati Mata Gersheno says that Eretz Yisrael is a land of mountain and valleys. It takes time. There's a progress. It progresses. It's a process. Like it says in Eretz Yisrael, you can't just expect all the enemies to leave at once. Even if a person reaches the level of a mountain, that your initiation is chaysim boiled, is being expressive, like a stamp that goes out. You could reach further than that and higher than that, which is a level of valley. Going inwards, you express yourself by nullifying yourself. Then you allow for God to express himself. He says, however, the Rebbe says the real healthy level of avodah is not just to have one of them, but to have a healthy balance of both of them, and both of them, all four of them, the two levels of yira and the two levels of ava, which make up the full name of God's name. For the four letters of God's name. It's not enough just to have that. It's going to avoid that. Person may say, okay, so I'm going to be only a valley. No, there's times a person has to be a mountain. Times a person has to be expressive. A person has to show the love. Because there's sometimes a mountain is better than a valley. Why? The chaysim shaikeya inin hayir v'abitl because im hayoyis amshachin al yoyis. Yes, we can have God's expression when I go inwards like a valley. So though it's a limitless expression, amshach atzmis the essence. Hariskalas tiyarak lasilovi, but we don't see it. The revelation only comes later, and in the meantime, there's no expression that's revealed. It's all concealed. Because Giluim isn't at the end of the day, which is the argument I have many times with certain people, say, no, never Giluyim, always Panemius, never just to be revealing, but sometimes it is important. And if you're only going to educate in the way of Bittul, it's not going to always work. Sometimes the kids need to feel the expression. And sometimes we need the revelation of the Ava and the whole relationship that's affected around the Ava, around the expression. In the Ava Varatze Harim, the expression of the mountains. Because that could be revealed now. If you're talking about measuring what is happening without taking into account the level of revelation, then of course the values are greater because what's being brought down yet not revealed is a much higher expression. It's hidden. God is expressing himself. Because we're going inwards. Therefore, how does a person reach avoid if you want to have everything? After a person, of course, starts with the year that's low level, but after you reach the different levels of love, the Harim, 2 levels of mountains, you come to the higher level of fear. where it's beyond your expression. Shiadarga yoina the bika, that's the valley. Mikomakim mitzad malas suslatata the chaysim sheikea hinegam beiritata. Ishmael legabe bezadarg shmava shem ba'if in the suslatata the chaysim belt. And here the Rebbe says something else. There's still something to say about the yira tata, the lower level of yira, even though it's just yira, not just it's just a level of punishment, but it's again, but there's that level that you're not expressing yourself. And by not expressing yourself, letting even in the way what's my avoided because I feel a fear of disconnect, but that fear gives space for God to express himself fully, even though your fear is not the proper fear of Yirei law, which is being in the awe of God. It still has some sort of personal connection. I feel disconnected, or I feel I'm scared of punishment. But the point is that you're not expressing yourself, you're going inwards. Okay, we're going to stop here because we'll finish tomorrow the Maamar. I think there's another page and a half. So that's why it says, to the water God, the Eretz Yisrael drinks. When you give someone to drink, so the person should give you back. That's the female waters. To inspire the reaction of the masculine waters, which is called maamarim, the lower waters. In fact, the higher waters should reveal itself, should express itself. When a person, God responds, an initiation from above that's brought down by our avodah, then it brings the water that goes into a low place. When we make a valley, we're bringing water. The valley automatically draws the water lower because it's going lower. Water goes down. Is zero bittul because therefore when we are avodah of valleys, it's much greater than fire. And therefore when we talk about Eretz Yisrael, we talk about the water, we don't talk about the fire. Because the mountains represent the fire, the expression. The pasuk continues, it's a place that God is always watching Eretz Yisrael. Rosh Hashanah from the beginning of the year, Avodas Hashem to the end of the year. Each year is a new expression from godliness down in Eretz Yisrael. It's brought down and teach Tan from the Alter Rebbe, the high Avodas Hashem, and you move it. Seemingly, it doesn't make sense. What do you mean that God is watching the Eretz Yisrael from the beginning of the year to the end of the year? Why? It should have just said. As soon as God finishes the first year, the second year starts. So he's always watching Eretz Yisrael. What does it mean he's watching from the beginning of the year to the end of the year? So God's always watching Eretz Yisrael. When we're talking about the bringing down from Eretz Yisrael, from the Eretz Yisrael below that affects the Eretz Yisrael above, it is a new light every year. We know the rule that every light that comes down on Erev Rosh Hashanah, on the blowing of the shofar goes up in Erev Rosh Hashanah. The light itself lasts a year. That's why it says this is the light of God's attention to Eretz Yisrael from the beginning to the end of the year, because at the end of the year the light goes away and a new light comes down. And every single year, from the first year of creation, a new light comes down on Rosh Hashanah. That light was never in this world before. It's not a recycled light, not a recycled idea. And it clothes itself and hides itself. We don't necessarily feel the difference. And that the whole upper world and the lower worlds draw from that new light that's never been here before to give life for creation throughout the year. How to reveal it depends on what kind of our behaviors. As we do our avodah each year, each day of the year, we have a new opportunity each day to reveal the light that's from the new year. The best way for us to express, that's why Rosh Hashanah is a day of Yira. In not a way, not like Pesach, which is Ava, is because we want to bring in this new light, and the best way to bring the new light to reveal is through Yira, through being a valley. It says Mirashis is missing the aleph in the writing. which is the idea of Rosh Ani, which is poor, poverty, Bitul. A year that starts with poverty, with negativity, or with limitations in the beginning. We make ourselves humble, like impoverished, poor on Rosh Hashanah. It becomes true wealth at the end. And the Rebbe says right away, when we accept the yoke of the new light and the king, so the rest you don't have to till the end of the year, the Eretz Hashanah the next year. The Ashiras can come right away. As soon as you started off with the initiation of Bittul, then the Ashiras starts growing right away. So this is the finishes of the maamarim. Eretz Harim, because the mountain and valleys and mountains and valleys. The Koigam al Kol Echad Misrael. This is also for each person. Shenikra Eretz Chefetz. A person is a land of desire. Each individual yid. Each Jew is like a yid that's full of natural resources, of stones and golden diamonds and rare earths and the oil, all the precious things that are under the ground. Every yid has them inside of them. It's you just need to mine it and find it. Like he says, der Grundven sich. Find it. How do you find it? What's the best way to find? To mine yourself, to find within yourself all your precious stones and valuables is through the mitzvah of Avodas Yisrael, loving your fellow Jew. How do you really affect Yetzias Mitzrayim? That we've left and through the love that we have, and as it's brought down, and through the Moshe Rabbeinu of every generation, the leaders of the Jewish people, that to give life to each one of the 600,000 general souls. The Shishim like the sun, gives light to the stars. Right? They have a dust of Indian Harim voice when a person does their own efforts of becoming a mountain and then a valley. And we find their own true love for Hashem. As explained, we get the true water coming down from heaven of all the brachas, the brachas that God's going to bless us. In the spiritual sense, in the brachim, in gashmis, in parnasa, in bani, chaim, zayin revichon, in abundance. God gives every single yid in abundance from His open, broad, holy hand. With great success. And once it starts, and Rosh Hashanah, we start bringing down immediately the brachas. With the blessing of it being written and inscribed for a good year, a sweet year. What's the main point of it all? That we shall have the true redemption with the righteous Moshiach, may come speedily. And take us standing upwards, our ascending to the Holy Land, speed in that time. Okay, again, a quick maamar we learned today. We got, Beis Hashem, something to go into Shabbos with. Have a wonderful Shabbos.